Excellent. An ale for me. And for my officers. In fact, ales for everyone.
10 Backward. With Rick and Will and Gemma.
Oh, yes.
Hello and welcome to 10 Backward, a Star Trek based podcast from merry old England. And my name is Gemma Turland. To my right is Will Turland.
Hello.
To my left is Rick Everson.
Hello.
And straight ahead of me, Rick Palmer.
Ahoy, hoy.
And today we are going to be discussing the topic Federation, Utopia or Dystopia.
What? But surely it's a utopia because they say it's a
So
utopia.
they would have you think, Will. So they would have you think.
Well, it can't be a dystopia, can it?
It's the ideal society. We've achieved everything. We've solved all the problems.
Unless
Have we, Rick?
you yourself are the problem, and then you must be rooted out.
Well, I mean, I suppose one.
Or just. Well, yeah.
What
Well,
did they
think-
do to solve all those problems? Who did they get rid of? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose you could say that on Earth we know that there's no poverty, no crime, no war, but you look out the window of Starfleet headquarters and you see paradise. It's easy to be a saint in paradise, but the Marquis do not live in paradise. That's all I have to say. I didn't copy and
getting
paste the
back
rest
to
of that.
Yeah, we did this in a different episode, didn't we?
Sorry, guys. Sorry. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point.
Well,
that,
interestingly, Will, you come up with a very interesting point that's salient to the subject.
that maybe there's a boundary to that utopia, and that maybe Earth is utopian, but maybe all of the Federation don't enjoy the same.
But it's
Utopia.
utopian for whom? I mean, I suppose people. It's utopian for the people who stayed on that planet and chose to stay in that society, but people who maybe don't want to live in that, it could be argued restrictive society, have left and and go to the further reaches, and then I don't know, have to resort to being the Marquis because they are totally shat on by the Federation.
I mean, in Star Trek is a series mostly set away from Earth, so we don't get... I mean, the Federation covers a lot of planets, but I guess Earth is where the headquarters are, and
Yes.
Earth is a planet where you go to, and it would exemplify what the Federation governance looks like. But we don't get to see. We only get sort of hints about it, I think. And
That's what I think maybe pertinent to the discussion. Be trying to just get what do we think the Federation is?
Yeah, well, I guess each planet has its own rules, and then there are Federation rules as well. So a bit like in America, so there's federal law, and then there's state law.
Yeah. Okay, so we get some hints of that where they have in various episodes discussions of qualifying for Federation membership. I think there's an episode of DS9 where they have another emissary comes through the wormhole, and he starts reinstating the old ancient Bajoran caste system, and Cisco says, well, that's going to have a bit of a bad thing for the old Bajoran joining the Federation thing, because we frown upon caste-based societies where people are deemed lower because of their birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a no-no. It's actually something that means that you can't join if you have a caste system.
Yes. Yeah.
Likewise, I think, is it attached in that late Next Gen? They have a planet which is split. There's basically two factions upon the planet, and Picard is quite clear in that a planet has to be united and unified. You can't have conflicting things. You can't like have half a planet join the Federation because they're all like, yay, everything about the Federation is great, and the other half like, well, actually, I'm not sure about this. Well, you can't join then.
Every member of the Federation entered as a unified world. And that unity said something about them, that they had resolved certain social and political differences, and they were now ready to become part of a larger community.
By all indications, the Kess are a very unified, very progressive people.
But the Pred are not. They're reclusive to the point of xenophobia.
Oh, in my research, I've found that it says that a single government is not required, but perhaps a single government is not required, but everyone needs to get on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's to be
Yeah.
unity. You can't have. I think what they were saying is you can't have one government on that planet joining.
Yes. And another one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the planet has to join or not at all.
Yeah.
That's interesting because you could argue that they're basically saying everyone has to. If you want to be part of the Federation, you have to agree with the Federation's
You can't buy
ideals.
half. You can't buy half an Easter egg, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't
no,
think,
Rick,
yeah,
you
you're
can't.
right.
No,
I think
yeah.
you
That's
can't.
what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I
fine.
think it's fair enough.
But
But
there's-
the joining of the Federation can't be a basis for a split on a planet, can it? So
No, and
on a planet, can it? So I think that's a fair enough requirement.
And the joining the Federation is voluntary, isn't it? I mean, as far as we know, the
Well,
Federation don't go
You
around.
can apply, I suppose.
Yeah, but you
Yeah,
don't.
no, you
but
can, yeah.
you also don't have to. I mean, I don't know. I don't get the sense that the Federation push themselves on.
No.
on other.
No, but it's
because they're
they
quite
don't.
particular
They-
about who joins
yeah.
and who doesn't join.
It's
They
a
don't
lengthy
push themselves,
process
but they-
because we see in Deep Space Nine, Bajor doesn't join. In fact, by the end, and the only time they're even close to it is in the 5th season. So if it hadn't been for Sisko's visions, where he warned Bajor not to join, it would have taken nearly 5 years, normal process, for them to come through. Obviously, then Sisko says, "Whoa, don't do that," and because he has visions of the upcoming war and everything, and obviously it turns out to be for the best. But it's a lengthy process. Kind of like, well, what were you guys doing all that time? I mean, like, they were like really long application forms, or what?
It depends on the pressure of the Federation, doesn't it? I mean, I think with the wormhole is important, and if you can get Bajor into the Federation, that's helpful. So I think with something like that, then they probably would. There would be political machinations to hasten the process.
But
I think.
on Bajor, I think there's natural resistance anyway. I mean, obviously...
Because they've just been occupied, haven't they?
They've just been occupied.
Yeah.
They don't want to be occupied. And many of them will feel that they're being occupied again. So that's probably why
Yeah.
it's taken so long with Bajor. That there's actually quite a lot of resistance on that planet anyway.
I think it's there's an interesting thing that Eddington once says about how you probably even want the Cardassians to join.
Starships chase us through the Badlands, and our supporters are harassed and ridiculed. Why? Because we've left the Federation, and that's the one thing you can't accept. Nobody leaves paradise. Everyone should want to be in the Federation. Hell, you even want the Cardassians to join.
It's like he seems to think the Federation are just like wandering around trying to get everyone to jump in and join their glorious
But
thing.
they do. I think they would have the
Yeah,
Cardassians.
I think
Of course
they
would.
gladly would. I think they would
Yeah.
gladly have almost anybody.
Yeah.
If they
But-
meet the
They're,
they
yeah.
meet the required
Yeah.
standard, if they agree with everything that the Federation.
But then you could
Say.
you could almost ask: are they keen to every race they meet to have them add their biological and technological distinctiveness to their own?
Yeah.
Because Eddington does also make the comparison to the Borg.
You know, in some ways, you're even worse than the Borg. At least they tell you about their plans for assimilation. You're more insidious. You assimilate people, and they don't even know it.
It's just
at
more
least the Borg,
insidious.
yeah, the Borg are upfront about what they want. You just want to get everyone in under like the guise of everyone being happy and cool about it.
And what
Yeah.
is the benefit of being in the Federation? Because there are large, there are large swathes of empires that are not part of the Federation, but seem to be going along quite nicely. You've got the Klingons, the Cardassians, until of course they get screwed over by.
Well, it's something that starts out relatively small, isn't it? So it starts out. We see it at the end of Enterprise. So it's Earth, the Vulcans, the Tellarites, the Andorians.
Yes, so they form the sort of the coalition, which I think it's hinted at will eventually become the basis of the
Yeah.
Federation.
And
I guess it's kind of like it's pooling resources in a way. it's pooling all those things that they need. Like, so they have a unified Starfleet for defence and science, and you know what you mine, what you can get from as a resource from one planet in abundance, maybe short on the other. So I kind of guess they have a fair resource sharing system, developing to such a point. Then they command such a wide area and resources, you develop full post scarcity.
And I suppose that when something starts off relatively small like that, there is going to, well, there is the potential there for it to expand rather than can get smaller. I suppose there's the potential there for it to. The idea has a potential for expansion, I suppose, and I guess what happens is that by the time we see it in TNG, it's pretty big. Like it's changed from
150 worlds.
The concept
Picard says in First Contact.
The concept of what it is in TNG is far different from the reasons it was set up in Enterprise, I suppose. So that's where I guess that's why we're asking the question, isn't it? It's evolved into, what is it evolved into by the time we see it in TNG?
Yeah.
And DS9 and Voyager.
Yeah. And what's the? I mean, once you have joined, what would be the drawbacks of leaving? This is all getting quite close to the bone. This conversation, isn't it?
That's it. Have we ever? I mean, have we ever heard of a planet leaving the Federation? Actually,
No, it never comes up. They came close, and I think
Didn't Vulcan come close at some points?
they almost did that as a story in Deep Space Nine. They were going to end Series 3 on a cliffhanger, which potentially would have had a Starfleet ship and a Vulcan ship ready in Earth orbit, ready to open fire on each other. And then the incoming Worf joining in Series 4 put the end to that plan. So they ended Series 3 on a standard episode, a really good one, but that's by the by. And that two-parter eventually became Homefront and Paradise Lost in the middle of Series 4. Just the changelings on Earth thing that was going to be dealt with became that, but they lost the Vulcan secession thing. So all the paranoia about changelings and the martial law and everything was going to literally cause Vulcan to want to leave the Federation in the original story draft. But
that's interesting.
but it didn't come to be, and we never touched on that. Sort of thing.
I guess the difference between the Federation and what's going on in the real world is that I imagine in the Federation everybody sort of signed up to the similar things, whereas in say Europe, it's different countries have different levels of membership. Like membership isn't one standard. It's you can choose to keep certain things. State. I mean, there is still kind of state rules and.
But it is more like
and
the EU than it is like America, isn't it? Because
I would agree
they are totally autonomous planets, but.
And I'd argue that there's culturally more of a mishmash in the EU, that we have quite distinct cultural references between the different countries, whereas America is more of a one.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Definitely.
Don't go over to America and say that. I think you're right.
Yeah, more so.
One state might have slightly different things to another, but I think the difference is more pronounced among EU member states than they are between American states.
As we said before, Star Trek very much does monocultures. So like one planet, one culture.
So you've got the logical planet, the
angry planet,
the argumentative planet.
Nice planet.
Yeah.
And I think with the Federation, a lot of the detail that we're trying to work out is unseen, isn't it? Because in all the shows, pretty much the main cast of these shows that we see are remarkable people.
Yes.
You don't get to see many everyman characters in Star Trek, so we don't get to experience what their life is like. So questions I would have is like, I mean, what is done to kind of protect the environment of the planet in terms of the ecosystem? What measures are taken for that? So what choices aren't people allowed to make in order for the planet to be run in such a way that it benefits everybody, if you see what I mean? Because I feel like the Federation is trying to do that. It's trying to is trying to. If you're trying to create a utopia, you have to have rules, right? And
Yeah.
and you can't have
Yeah.
everybody doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we're getting to. I think you can't have everybody doing whatever they want because not everybody wants to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So you sort of have to get to a system where most people, the vast majority of people, are happy, or as many people as happy
But
as
it's
possible.
that's
so for
that
some
kind
people,
of,
it's not a utopia. It's
because it's never going to be because
That's not
some
their
people
utopia.
never buy into that form of happiness.
right.
But then I suppose people can leave Earth if they want to. If you're on Earth and you're not happy with how it is, you're free to leave, and you can set up. There are colonies, aren't there? And I'm guessing there are colonies, human colonies that aren't in the Federation.
There was that comes. I was remembering something that Tasha Yar says when they. What episode is it when they're talking about drugs?
I think it's in
Symbiosis.
Symbiosis, yeah.
And
So
she describes the planet that she came from.
Takana 4, yeah, it's literally fallen completely apart, and it's just chaos. It's gangs running around killing each other.
Yeah, and this is a Federation planet. This is a human colony Federation planet.
Yeah.
This is not Utopia.
No.
This is
That's right. That's
and-
right. She has a really on the
I
nose.
wasn't meant to.
She has a really on the nose conversation with Wesley about drugs in that episode, which is a bit cringy, kind of looking back. The conversation basically goes. Wesley's basically like,
What I can't understand is why anyone would voluntarily become dependent on a chemical.
Wesley, no one wants to become dependent. That happens later.
But it does happen. So why do people start?
On my home planet, there was so much poverty and violence that for some, the only escape was through drugs.
How can a chemical substance provide an escape?
It doesn't. But it makes you think it does.
oh god, it's awful.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's well-meaning, and what Tasha Yar's basically saying is right, but it is like, yeah, so it's a right on the nose late 80s kind of don't do drugs message.
So my question regarding the colony that she hails from, so this is supposed to be a failed Federation colony, and it's descended into anarchy, and there's a lot of murder and rape and chaos, and it's all pretty bad there. Why don't the Federation go back in and restore order?
Clean it up.
But
Or
then-
disband it.
Why isn't that then them being sort of the totalitarian state that we're concerned about?
Okay.
If these colonists have gone to that level, why should we go in and tell them they're wrong?
But why allow? Because it's clearly not working. So if they're saying that we're not going to allow a planet into our Federation if it is not up to our standards, why allow their own colonies to slip in their standards?
Well,
Yes,
have they, are
Because
they
it's-
essentially abandoning said colonies?
Yeah.
Like, well, your
It
standards
would-
are too low, you're out.
You're you're part of the Federation
Hit us
by
up
name,
when
and that's
yeah.
it.
Have
Is
a
that-
word with yourself. Come have a chat with us when you got yourself sorted.
Is the benchmark for admittance to the Federation a technological one?
Well, I don't know, because we've already mentioned there's societal things that they have to have achieved, at least some level of planetary unity, that they all want to join the Federation. They have to have achieved certain things, like they don't have a caste system. So imagine, like, what
Yeah.
other ones have they got? You know,
But
do they-
but I'm thinking generally the Prime Directive.
Well, we
there
shouldn't-
has to be like a technological.
we shouldn't be
Right.
talking to them if they haven't achieved warp drive.
So
but then by
presumably-
default, I guess if we're not talking to them, see what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
presumably they have to be. They can't be pre-warp and be a member of the Federation.
But
I
what
guess
if? But what
because
if?
they
There's
wouldn't.
see, yeah. But this is the thing that annoys me a little bit is that, I mean, we live in a society that doesn't have warp drive, but we understand it. We're not. We wouldn't see a ship arrive in space with warp drive. Go, God, golly, what's that? What's going on? What? God.
Yeah, but what?
Yeah, but-
I don't
So
know.
imagine what I mean is it like wouldn't it be better to have a planet in the Federation where their society is run really well, but maybe they don't have spaceships, and their societal knowledge can be added.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, you look at look at, say, in Insurrection, the Baku, they're observing them like they're a real primitive culture, and then it turns out actually they're quite capable of building warp-capable spaceships. They just don't want to because they're quite happy with. They've achieved such an equilibrium with their philosophy, their society, and their state of being. They don't want to travel in space, so you're kind of like, well, would you not have them as a member, or would you? Because they wouldn't. They don't indulge in space travel.
But they have that capability, and they have that level of...
So, but what's the difference between them and a society that hasn't developed warp travel, but maybe they just don't want to? As Rick says, I think it's kind of like...
Maybe they do it on a sort of case-by-case basis, and maybe the Baku would have to apply for Federation membership, and then they'd have to explain why they want to be a part of the Federation. And maybe then they'd... maybe then they'd make a decision on it.
I would imagine the Baku probably have a very good reason saying we really want the protection of the Federation after what happened in Insurrection.
Yeah,
that would be a motivating thing for them to join, because one group has already made a play for their planet and would have got rid of them, and B, after that the secret's out, everyone's going to know about it. So you kind of like. You'll be really careful about how that affects your society.
So I suppose that kind of brings us on to, I guess, what do you get out of being in the Federation?
Yeah.
What's the benefit of being in the Federation? That's one thing, isn't it? The protection of the Federation.
Absolutely, the protection.
Unless, of course, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, or if you're the Maquis.
Yeah, well, they're in the wrong place
yeah.
at the wrong time.
Well, that was very much the thrust of the whole of them seceding was, if you do this, you will lose that protection. But their alternative was to leave their planet and settle a different one.
Yeah.
The Federation have given your planet away, so if you want to keep it, you have to not be in the Federation.
Owns their planet. By joining the Federation owns them.
That's what the Federation.
Well, I mean, ultimately,
it is.
It's the territory. Yeah, I mean,
territory.
You can argue the semantics around territory and stuff, but yeah, the only way for them to keep their planet was to not be part of the Federation. And then you have to live in Cardassian-controlled space, and with all the risks that would entail for a human colony.
It's a protection racket.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's...
I mean, I guess, so I think for me, the what's interesting about looking at the Federation as a dystopia is that in sci-fi in general, as soon, in any sort of sci-fi film or literature, as soon as you are told that a society is a utopia, immediately, like, your first thought is, no, it isn't. What's going on behind the scenes? What is it?
Anything that seems too good to be true is too good to be true.
Right.
And actually, Star Trek has done this itself. If you look at episodes like the Apple in the original series, they're like, wow, this planet is like an Eden. Oh, hang on, someone's just been shot to death by a planet that shoots poisonous darts.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's exploding rocks. Oh, and someone's been struck by lightning. Your planet's a fucking death trap. So it's not an ideal Eden, is it?
Yeah. And I always think of in the first Matrix movie, they talk about how the first Matrix, the virtual reality, they put that together as a utopia for humans, and the human mind rejects it because it can't deal with that. It can't understand that concept. And I wonder if that's in a way sort of my reaction to Star Trek whenever they say it's a utopia. I'm like, but what is that? What is a utopia? I've never experienced it. It's not a real thing. What's going on behind the scenes?
Well, then
do
you need to go and have a chat with Councillor Troy about your ingrained paranoia?
Maybe I do, but she'd turn all the lights off and she'd
start rubbing up against you.
Yeah,
but there's also, I mean, that actually brings to that.
Anyway, that
brings to another a scene that sparks this the idea for this episode. When the child, who is this traumatized little boy who's seen his entire family and the crew
in the episode Hero Worship.
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, different episode. there's a point. There's a scene where for some reason they've dumped this traumatized little boy in a class with lots of other children, and he just wants to do one specific task that he wants to build something when the rest of the class is singing, and just the shock and horror of the teacher when he's refusing to do what the rest of the class is doing, and the kind of. And everybody else, and it's this kind of rejection of his independent thought.
Timothy, we're done with sculpture for now.
It's not finished.
We'll come back to it next period. Why don't you pick up your mythology book and follow along?
But it's not finished.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
it's
just
freedom of expression.
Yes.
And independent thought alarm.
And there's a kind of, especially in TNG, there's a little bit of a thread of that runs through it.
There is.
With Barclay and the crew's rejection of him because he's not right.
Yeah, he's not a good fit.
No.
Just doesn't fit in, Geordie.
I can't stand to be in the same room as him.
That's a fairly severe reaction to someone, who's not into the same stuff you are.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you could argue that in TNG we're very much seeing a sort of a militarized.
I think this is an issue.
We're
This
not
is something we
seeing
see throughout the series.
Yeah.
We are always seeing Starfleet, and that is, for however you want to define Starfleet as an organisation, its aims, it has a military-based structure, and so there is an element of chain of command, conformity, and following orders.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives it. But we're seeing a very sort of focused snapshot of the Federation society through the eyes of the military. It's not until Deep Space Nine we actually see regularly non-Federation people. And that kind of gives us a different slant on it.
Yeah.
There's an episode of TNG, is it The Chase, where they're looking for that artifact.
Mm-hmm.
And that archaeologist gives Picard the cooler nest cast, and Picard tears a hole in his trousers, figuratively. But that archaeologist, I can't remember the name of the character, but
Richard Galen.
I know that the actor played Bishop Brennan in Father Ted.
Oh, right.
I'm pretty sure it's him.
Did he?
I think so. John Norton or
Jim Norton. It was Norman Large who played Richard Galen.
Jim Norton.
However, if you go to Descent Part 1,
right.
Jim Norton played Einstein in
Right,
Data's
okay,
hologram.
I'm getting confused. No, it wasn't Bishop Brennan then in that one. But anyway, that archaeologist compares Picard to a Roman general patrolling the border, and the Federation is a bit like the Roman Empire, because it's centered around Rome. Generals aren't really allowed to bring their armies back to Rome, and there's a lot of territory that gets brought into this one idea, and then you're looked after, and
Picard makes a similar comparison actually in Best of Both Worlds Part 1. When he's talking to Guinan, he says, I wonder if the Emperor Honorius, as he watched the Visigoths, truly realised he was about to watch the Roman Empire fall.
That's it.
So he's directly comparing the Federation to an empire, isn't he?
Yeah, so it is like,
That's interesting. I mean, some things, particularly in TNG, that feel a little bit dystopian is, and I'd done a bit of research, and I'd read an article citing things that are a little bit dystopian about Star Trek. One of the things that it was talking about, which I think I kind of agree with, is that all of the characters are really into like classical music and classical art.
Wagner.
Yeah. There's no contemporary music or contemporary art.
Riker
It's
likes
almost
jazz.
as if he does, but is jazz
It's
contemporary
still
in the
an archaic
24th?
form.
Yeah.
At that point. Yeah, there's no visible clues to what's popular music
Right.
in the 21st century.
And is that because freedom of expression is a bit frowned upon in the Federation?
That's because they had to pay royalty fees. I think I have to admit, I bet the writers would love to have had a scene where where Data said to Picard, "Captain, are you coming to my rendition of Pussy Control by Prince this evening?" "Oh, yes, Mr. Data, I would love to come to that. Is it true that he had one of his ribs removed?" "It is, Captain." And so on. But they had to pay money to Prince's estate, wouldn't they? So, but I know exactly what you mean. It's a fair point.
It is. Don't they always do that thing though when they're citing creative people through history, where they say two actual
real
names
ones.
and then one made
Yeah, it's
for
like a formula,
contemporary.
isn't it?
Jimmelon Flibflop from the planet Krasnishna and Hitler and Goebbels. When it's like, who would you have round for dinner?
But interestingly, from where we are now, we're just a bit over like 300 years from when Mozart was around. And so
And
to them,
nothing since Mozart. Well, no.
now, even if they referenced, say, something like Prince, that's still 300 years or in their past. So that's, to them, that's as classical and archaic as Mozart is to us.
Yeah.
So it's like,
So
what
there's no
do
current-
they have? Who creates now?
Yeah.
That's
And
it.
we don't see anything of that.
Rolling Stones.
But I
They're
think,
still going.
They're still going.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is actually a bit of a thing in sci-fi that it's so hard. The one thing that's going to immediately date a sci-fi show or movie is to come up with an idea of what futuristic music might be like. And you kind of get it in like have you in the movie Total Recall? They have some futuristic like dance music in the bar that Arnie goes to it in Mars. And
The
if
one
you
with
watch
the one with the lady with 3 boobs.
yes,
Who is
And-
Sonia Gomez in Series 2 of Next Generation. Appears in 2 episodes. Q Who being one of them.
But yeah, that always strikes me as an attempt at sort of futuristic music, but it's like it just sounds like it's music from the 80s. Or it sounds like what musicians in the 80s might have imagined futuristic
But then
music
isn't
would
all
be
sci-fi
like.
what put people in like the 80s or 90s, or whatever decade it's from? Well, they imagine technology is going to be like in 300-400 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and that's how we end up with a mobile phone. And now we say we have like Discovery now, and our vision of technology in the 23rd century now is obviously a little bit different to what someone in the 60s thought. And
Yeah.
that's sort of, and that's why I started out as this challenge trying to reconcile those. But we're not brave enough to have a stab at music that often.
Yeah.
Next Gen had a stab at, say, fashions and decided jumpsuits were definitely the way forward.
Jumpsuits and really
And
chunky
ugly jumpers. Yeah, ugly jumpers.
Yeah.
But
They're just not brave enough to try music.
no.
But
the
it is incredibly difficult, and as Will says, dating, and it's
Often lame.
often lame, often
So-
really lame.
I think DS9 was the brave one
Unless
again.
it's-
In terms of it had a bit of an overhaul on. It did away with the civilian jumpsuits. Jake initially, the first 2 or 3 series, had to wear those fucking jumpsuits. But like by later, he's got some pretty smart, sharp outfits.
really snazzy
Yeah.
jackets.
Although I think they're sort of more rooted in the styles of the sort of the 90s. There's not
Yeah.
a huge amount to say this is the far future now. It's just like, well, at least it doesn't look like a dick in a jumpsuit.
Yeah.
But and likewise, they did at least try a Breen nursery rhyme at one point, which is a little bit of a future music thing. That's something.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Alan Moraine, I
Another-
suppose.
Oh,
Well,
there
of
we
course.
go. Yeah, that's what we'll
I think once you've done Alan Moraine, though, you don't even bother with any future music because you've
Yeah.
peaked.
But yeah, another point this article was making is that there's no one in TNG kind of sits around in a bar. You don't see like a couple of people with like some crazy punk hairstyles having a couple of beers talking about, like, I don't know, some kind of anarchistic music or something. Everyone's talking about
real alcohol is rare.
yeah, synthahol is that's another
What's
think-
in
that's it.
synthahol, you know?
I think again though,
Well,
Conformity drugs.
Conformity drugs.
yeah, but I think you could say DS9 does make an effort to try and
Yeah.
change that a bit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you go into 10 Forward, you are largely looking at people who have joined Starfleet.
Yeah.
They've joined a military ranking, so they're not going to be talking massively about
Yeah. No.
about those subjects. And you can kind of see the benefit of a fake alcohol that doesn't impair your senses if you could be called to red alert any second. So,
Yeah, definitely.
kind of-
If there's going to be a Borg attack
yeah.
within the hour, maybe don't be battered
Yeah.
forward.
Or maybe just
Or
be
maybe
battered,
be- yeah.
because why the
Rather
hell
be
not?
pissed.
Yeah,
But
Whereas
it-
DS9, we see people get pissed.
yeah.
We see. We don't have the punk hairstyles chatting about. Well, it's some fairly wacky hairstyles on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, but Quark's bar is it's a civilian bar, isn't it? It's not a Starfleet bar.
No.
That's the difference.
And we see
I
more
see.
everyday people in DS9, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, but they're still, talented and stuff. But we see characters that aren't, Starfleet. They're not in ops and stuff. So
Yeah.
Keiko and Quark and Ram and.
Jake as well.
Jake.
There's a nice. I like the way Jake's story pans out in that Sisko does want him to join Starfleet, and he decides he doesn't want to do
I
that.
think that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he gets a lot of great stories around him ending up being a journalist. But the idea that Sisko's son rejects the idea of Starfleet is a great one. I
A
think.
story and a good story. There's an episode where it's when the Dominion have taken over DS9 and Wayoon is filtering, is checking Jake's stories first before they go out. It would have been cool to have that kind of story, but when it's the Federation, so the Federation are checking. his stories.
Yeah, the Federation
So
news
you
service.
can't have this story because this makes the Federation look bad.
Yeah.
You're kind of assuming that you would hope
Maybe
that
they are
they're
doing
not. But yeah, I mean,
But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
it
I
would
get the
be-
impression that sometimes governments will take certain actions to kind of to kind of protect people from themselves. So often after war, there'll be like weirdly after World War II, I think America in the 50s kind of it prospered quite well. And it there was an economy of people being able to buy things, and a bit like the kind of in Fallout, the kind of houses that they're in. I mean, Fallout isn't set in the 50s, but it has a very 50s kind of
Yeah.
look to it, aesthetic, and there was that kind of prosperous, optimistic age just after World War II, and I think society's kind of wanted to portray that image to make people feel good after a world war, and I imagine perhaps the Federation, if the dystopian elements of it are that's maybe gone a little bit too far, that too much thinking is being done for people by whoever's governing, and people just got used to it.
You've kind of made me think, having what you're saying about Jake's stories and everything. It would have been actually the story regarding Sisko bringing the Romulans into the war was initially in first draft, I think, based around Jake uncovering things in the course of writing a story for the Federation News Network. That element was largely dropped, but if they had done a story where, say, Jake had filed a report that maybe reflected badly upon the command crew, and they had to deal with the fallout of that story going out, A would have said that the Federation doesn't filter its news stories and doesn't hide this stuff, as well as being. And then I realised, well, actually, they do that thing. They do that on Voyager when the Doctor writes that holonovel that basically is a massive hatchet job on all his crewmates.
Photons be free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a huge legal battle to stop that being published. And it's kind of like, well, there we go. There's your censorship.
Yeah.
Here we are portraying the heroes of the Federation, the mighty Starfleet officer, as being less than perfect. And in fairness, I think the Doctor's story was massively unfair to the crew. It did make them out to be quite unpleasant.
And that episode's played largely for comedy, isn't it? And
that was a sad thing, because it could have been. It's kind of like they started for comedy, and then it's like they wanted to go and recreate A Measure of a Man in a way by having this this little hearing around holographic rights and the rights of the artist to create his work.
Yeah.
It just never really panned out as well.
That's another measure of a man is a good point, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
That's an episode that highlights what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because there's almost a feeling
does,
if you've enjoyed this series for a season and a half up to the point of Measure a Man, there's no question in your mind that Data is fully sentient and a person with his own rights. Why the hell do they even need to have a hearing about it?
Yeah, that's it. In a supposed utopia, why would that be even questioned?
And there's also the question, why has he reached... Well, he's an officer, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's gone through the academy.
Yeah.
Why would it suddenly be called into question now?
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Obviously,
I never thought of that before.
There is the one person who wants to break him down, see how he works, and make loads of him. It's like, well, surely so he should say, hang on, this is a guy who's graduated the academy, moved up the command track, he's lieutenant commander on the flagship. No, you can't fucking break him down and build new ones. He's a fucking person, you idiot.
But
Get out of my office.
But he's owned by the Federation, so they have to...
Federation property.
They literally try and make that thing.
Commander Data is a valued member of my bridge crew, based on what I've heard. I cannot allow Commander Data to submit himself to this experiment.
I was afraid this might be your attitude, Captain. Here are Starfleet's transfer orders, separating Commander Data from the Enterprise and reassigning it to Starbase 173 under my command.
What? It's a brilliant episode and it's incredible, but actually, why did it even happen? Why was that ever a consideration?
Yeah. But I guess thinking about what Troy says in First Contact about the history, she explains to Zephyr Cochrane about what will happen in the next few hundred years. I mean, those things are terrible, but sometimes you need a challenge, don't you? Like societies need challenges to face and progress beyond.
Yeah. Well, you could say
how does Federation society not stagnate when a lot of things are catered for?
Oh, because you've got guys like Jim Kirk getting really arsy about stagnating societies that don't like this
and kicking the shit out of computers.
But the problem, I mean, that is an intrinsic problem with Utopia, because a Utopia supposes that this is the pinnacle, and there's no moving forward, there's no moving up, because there's nowhere else to go.
Right, there's nothing to strive for.
Yeah,
which Kirk would argue is that's a society that's not living and breathing. Then the Prime Directive.
Imagine if he told that to himself. Smoking
like that.
Captain, our prime directive of non-interference.
That refers to a living, growing culture. Do you think this one is?
I think this is where we break down to the core of Roddenberry's vision. And if you're not watching this on the holodeck in the 24th century, I'm doing air quotes around Roddenberry's vision because I think it's a very subjective term. But the way I've read materials and everything, the way I understand it is Roddenberry developed the series and he had a more evolved humanity. But if you look at the original series, it wasn't always as far ahead as you might have liked. Whereas by the time we get to the late 70s, the motion picture and then into Next Generation, Roddenberry's vision was much more this full utopia that we were so far beyond where we are now. We didn't even fight amongst ourselves. At the point the Next Gen writers had this huge barrier to writing stories because they were not allowed to have conflict between the main characters. Yeah. And the essence of drama is, of course, conflict. So you're tying your writer's hands massively here. And much as I love Next Generation, I adore it, it's how I got into Star Trek. It will always be my favourite series because it was the first. I do see that way of having that perfect society and these people trying to fit into it was a bind. Yeah. Whereas I think what Deep Space Nine came along and did was to question that part and put people in situations outside of it. I think the most genius thing they did was to set it outside of the Federation space in a place that, say, wanted to join, but then put the war in. And then you introduce Section 31 and you say, it's great, so we've got what you say is a utopia, but how do you maintain that? How do you keep that going? How do you keep that going in the face of the really bad situations? And then you get episodes where Sisko has to break his own moral rules to bring the Romulans in for the greater good. Then you have Section 31, you have to say all along, there is this one shadowy organisation. And I think that was the beauty of Enterprise, is how do you get there? How do you build that society? And I find, how do you build that society? How do you maintain that society? Much more interesting from a story perspective than, we have a perfect society, let's go around and tell everyone how great it is and assume they're going to join. And that's maybe where we have the thing that, do we have a society of people who are just so brainwashed into their own utopia they can't comprehend how people don't want to join?
And I think it's fair to say that I think DS9 makes the Federation feel less like a dystopia by exploring the idea of it being a dystopia. I think by questioning it. Don't know why I had a problem with the word questioning. It's a straightforward word. There it is. But by exploring the idea that it isn't a utopia, that makes it feel a whole lot more realistic, and it takes some of that sinisterness away, I think.
It is.
And
Next Generation is almost like that really, really beautiful woman who's completely beyond what you could even comprehend and completely inaccessible. Whereas DS9 points out that actually when she eats she dribbles a little bit and now and again she breaks wind.
Well,
but it doesn't ruin her. It just makes it makes it makes it more real.
Makes it more appealing.
It reminds me of
this is a 2-beer analogy that I really don't. I wish I had.
It's a great bit in High Fidelity, the movie, and also the book where the main character cites his girlfriend's underwear. Like when you're first dating someone, you kind of they're making an effort. You see all the sexy underwear. When you really get to know them, you see the granny pants, the comfortable underwear.
Yes. Okay.
And it's like that's kind of what.
You're feeling more comfortable, Rick. Now you know where that was going.
Thank you. Yeah, you have.
But that's like
that's
the real.
That's the destination I was aiming at, and then I went off course. Into drooling women.
Similarly to that, in the film 500 Days of Summer, early on in that film, one of the main characters, he lists the things that he loves about it. So it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel in this film, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character lists all the things that he loves about her. He lists like 7 things, and then later on, spoiler for anyone that hasn't seen this film, but later on they break up, and he lists all the things that he doesn't like her about it, and they're all the same things.
Right.
I think that's kind of like this too. Like the things that seem perfect aren't.
The things that seem perfect are the very things that are dystopian about it.
I have seen and read High Fidelity, and it is in my top 2 John Cusack films. The other being Grosse Pointe Blank, which is awesome.
So
really
good.
Love Grosse Pointe.
In DS9 as well, we have a character in Kira who doesn't really take to the Federation like her. Initially, it takes a long time for her to her and Cisco to become friends. And again, I mean, we've been talking about this in this episode, but I think it's DS9 which best portrays the Federation.
Yes, absolutely.
And Quark. Quark's always very interesting on the subject.
He will always
of the
call
Federation.
bullshit on the Federation, won't he?
Like in End of Series 2, the Jem'Hadar, when him and Cisco are locked up, they're detained by the Jem'Hadar. First time they've encountered them, and Quark pulls Cisco up on why he's always so down on him and down on the Ferengi, and he points out that if you look back in history, the Ferengi have had a lot better history than humans have. They never nearly wiped themselves out through nuclear war. Yes. So you look down on us now, but we're better than you ever were. Thing. And it's an uncomfortable truth, and Cisco acknowledges that in a way. And then I think in Way of the Warrior you have that awesome conversation between Quark and Garak, where they're comparing the Federation to root beer. It's so cloying and bubbly and happy.
It's insidious.
It's insidious. The thing is, the more you drink of it, the more you start to like it.
What do you think? It's vile. I know. It's so bubbly and cloying and happy. Just like the Federation. But you know what's really frightening? If you drink enough of it, you begin to like it. It's insidious. just like the Federation.
Well, we as some research for this, we watched Homefront and Paradise Lost, which is the two-parter that you mentioned earlier on, Rick. That was originally going to be the end of the season 3.
Yeah.
And in that two-parter, I think you can find pretty much every example of the Federation as a dystopia.
Yeah.
And there's a great Quark bit in that episode right near the beginning, where, and I think this is a little bit typical of the Federation character's attitude to Quark, where so the episode opens and there's a bombing at a conference
in Antwerp.
And Bashir and O'Brien are, they're pretty cut up about it. It's
not cut up enough. They don't go to the Hollow Suite and play Biggles.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe they're feeling like, I don't know, like they need to explore their
aren't they
patriotism
supposedly they're playing something that's it's like defense of the realm. They're kind of playing that.
Yeah, it's a Battle of Britain, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's it. I think that's it. And Quark. He tries to empathise with him, and he says,
When the great monetary collapse hit Ferenginar, I was hundreds of light years away, serving as a ship's cook on a long-haul freighter. I can't tell you the heartbreak I suffered, knowing that rampant inflation and currency devaluation were burning like wildfires through the lush financial foliage of my home. It still depresses me even today. I remembered thinking my accounts needed me, and there was nothing I could do. I felt so helpless. So you see, I do understand.
Somehow, you telling me that doesn't make me feel the least bit better.
It's kind of a joke,
but they sneer at
their
him.
disdain for him,
and he is genuinely. He's making a comparison that, from his point of view, is
in his
equal.
society, in his
And actually, culturally, that's just the way his culture is geared. Why should that be any less real as a feeling?
Exactly.
He's trying to empathise with you as well.
And they just roll their eyes and they're like,
They
bloody
literally
capitalists.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, hang on, Quark's like, he's trying to empathise with you, and he's telling you a story about a situation where he felt the same. Can't you look beyond your Federation ideals of there not being a currency in the Federation and understand what Quark's trying to say?
Because ultimately, Quark is an actual person who is talking to them and trying to help them.
Yeah.
And they're so caught up on the difference between his values and theirs that they disregard him.
Yeah, they're in his bar. Surely they're paying for this.
Yeah.
So I have no idea how the payment works.
Yeah, they're in that bar and they like it. I mean, it's
Starfleet frequents that bar a lot. Who pays for that?
It's such a jerk behaviour, isn't it, by those guys?
Yeah. So that's a big thing. I guess moving a little bit off Homefront and Paradise Lost, I think we should talk about this massive thing about how there is no money, no economy, I guess, in the Federation. But my counterpoint to that is, does that mean basically everyone is unpaid? So is everyone a slave to the Federation?
Well, no, because they're not forced to do things.
No.
Okay.
And one thing that in those episodes, one thing that has been cited in conversations up to now is
Cisco's dad.
A
slave chef in New Orleans.
Of course, he
churning out gumbo.
Because there are many people who would, if they didn't have to worry about funding it, would quite happily run a restaurant and feed people, and that's what brings them joy. So I don't think that's a...
And I think that's a good point, because in those episodes...
It's still an economy, isn't it? It's the New World economy.
But how does...
But yeah, it's a good point. How does that work?
Yeah. But Cisco's dad is running that restaurant for the joy of running a restaurant. And
you assume everyone is granted some level of base housing.
Basic.
They have a replicator, so they can provide themselves with all the food, water, and any other material goods they may wish for. Is there a certain thing where if you decide to pursue a vocation in your life that contributes more heavily to society than, say, another one, do you reap some further reward.
Wait. But that's like that episode of Voyager where the Doctor goes to a hospital and people who are doing a more important job get better treatment.
Well, yeah, and
that's a dystopia.
Yeah, I mean, no, it is. It is. If you are deemed more more worthwhile to society, and that would create a caste system, surely.
Yeah, because I guess in that Voyager episode, it sort of is a bit of they're trying to have a meritocracy, but a meritocracy only works if everybody has the same ability to do what they want, and sometimes not knowing what you want to do doesn't mean you're not contributing.
No.
Yeah. Whereas I said everyone's provided with a base level, so everyone gets a house, they get a replicator, and those can do this. I assume then they also all get equal access to healthcare and to education.
Yeah.
And those things are all freely available. But therefore, if you then use that education and choose to become a doctor and save lives, do you have access to a certain level of further reward that you don't get if you think, if you become, say, and I can't name a career here without sounding horrible, but I don't know, like movie critic or something. Something has very little value to society. I don't know.
Yeah, professional podcaster.
Podcaster.
Star Trek podcaster, right?
We're reading like Ice Age 72.
But it's a good point, because what do you if you live in a society exactly, what's the motivation for and I guess this is the kind of problem with our society at the moment, because what I'm going to say is, what's the motivation to kind of better yourself if there's no financial reward? But isn't that an awful thing, that financial reward is the first thing that I think of?
But in today's
we live in a society where in a society where we're conditioned to measure ourselves by what we have,
and also survival is based on your financial reward in our current society.
And
you cannot
status
continue
as well.
without being able to.
Yeah, but I don't know. Survival's a bit of a.
Well, like quality of life, I guess.
Quality of life. Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, it's just hard to think. I kind of think of Barclay in TNG, and he's given such a hard time because he doesn't show up on time, and he's obviously not in love with his job on the Enterprise, and he's immersed in his kind of fancy world in the holodeck.
I don't think it's so much he doesn't like his job. I think it's just he's really uncomfortable around other people. And they're not. And
I don't think he likes his workplace environment.
Yeah,
and I can just understand.
I understand why.
Well, once again, we're kind of confusing Starfleet with the Federation, because Starfleet, as we keep saying,
they're separate,
is
and I guess
largely military organisation turning up on
Starfleet,
time.
and I guess Starfleet is Earth, isn't it? Starfleet is an Earth organisation.
And going back to Paradise Lost and Homefront, in that the story is that Starfleet are going to take over Earth, and kind of impose military law above Federation law, and so I guess we know that they're Starfleet's a part of the Federation, but it's the military part.
But isn't Starfleet an Earth organisation? But because Earth is in the Federation, aliens can be part of Starfleet.
Well, because we see Starfleet in Enterprise, and I think when they form the Federation, they just sort of fold all the, say, the Andorian Imperial Guard, whatever the Vulcan name for their
but the Vulcans
all fold into one Starfleet.
But don't the Vulcans still have their own? The Vulcans still have their own ships.
I think then planets can maintain their own ship thing for whatever reason.
Right.
This is where we get into that blurred line of it's not being strictly well defined.
Yeah, I suppose you would think that the Federation would have a problem with a member of the Federation having their own sort of separate army, and yet
possibly more powerful technology.
And what are they going to, what could they potentially do with that? And then on the other hand, but if it's a utopia, how can you say, well, you can't have your own. You can't be allowed to have any sort of military force. That has to belong to the Federation. Well, that doesn't sound very utopian. So feels like it maybe in Star Trek the solution is, well, let's not sort of talk about that explicitly, because if we do that, then maybe the idea of a utopia falls apart a little bit.
This is the intrinsic flaw with this whole discussion is there's no clear definition. The entirety of the Federation, how it works, has not been laid down. Different writers have come and gone throughout Star Trek, and they've all put their own stamp on it, and they've all made their own little hints, but none of them have followed a set plan or formula. And so when you put it all together, you can you interpret things depending on the bits you put together, but it's never necessarily as it was intended. Because no one intended these disparate elements to be examined as an overall guide to a society that no one's clearly defined.
Yeah, and also, like we were saying before, I guess we haven't seen many characters, apart from in Deep Space Nine. Most characters we see are you know, the Federation and Starfleet is ingrained into their life. It's their, it's why they are who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. It's hard to detach yourself from.
In a
from
way,
that if it's so ingrained into your existence.
It's interesting to examine the non-Starfleet people you do see, because, like, say Bashir's parents turn up on the station one time, and Bashir's father is basically a guy who's tried every job going because essentially he can't stick to any of them, and Bashir clearly has some issues around that. He's like not a person who's very proud of his father or deems him as someone who's achieved much. He's got quite an attitude around that. So it's like, so he's not someone who's like taken this dream of the Federation and gone out to better himself. He's a person who really can't find his place in a way. Then you have someone like Harry Mudd, who's just gone out and lived on the fringes. You know, he's like he's not representing the ideals of Roddenberry's vision, surely.
Yeah, and also Harry Mudd's always, his whole thing is basically sort of getting rich. I guess, and so he can go off and sit.
Isn't he?
He wants to just want to go and sit on a beach and sip jippers.
Yeah,
but how can he do that if there's no economy?
Well, he can, because there are. I mean, presumably he goes outside the Federation,
right?
That also brings up the episode of Mudd's Women, which describes several planets that are, you know, that these women don't have any agency. They don't have any agency. They don't have any means to join Starfleet. You know, we had a whole conversation about why don't these women have any ambition other than to become wives? Well, it's because that's a society they've been brought up in. They've never been told that they can ever be anything but a wife to a farmer.
Mine was a farm planet, with automated machines for company, and then 2 brothers to cook for, mend their clothes, canal mud a foot thick on their boots every time they walked in.
Fine, Evie, fine.
No, it's not fine. We've got men willing to be our husbands waiting for us, and you're taking us in the opposite direction.
So
or it's the best opportunity they have.
Yeah,
I think it's the best opportunity they have to escape the life that they have.
Yes.
The life that they have is one
Go
where they're not encouraged to.
Yeah, go on to a slightly different form of the life that they were brought up in. But there are whole worlds that have no ambition, that have no. But they presumably they're human colonies. So
I think it's probably from. I mean, I'm not sure how it would. If this is true, but I imagine it's from the early days of when humanity was kind of going out and colonising.
I think
before there's a grey area when the Federation was forming, and they probably just forgot some people.
It's kind of heavily hinted at that there's a number of colony ships were sent out, and not all of them were heard back from. You see that even in Next Gen, Up the Long Ladder.
Yeah,
they basically discover 2 separate colonies and turned quite different. There's the stereotype Irish colony and the bland clone colony. And they had no idea they were there.
In the original series, they there's a few episodes where they're investigating the lost ships, aren't they?
Yeah,
lost colony ships.
What's the one where it's a mining planet? They do that terrible thing where they create a pigeon language, and I can't even remember what is it, an Enterprise?
I guess that's pre-Federation.
Oh, yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it?
So I
you
guess
could say,
I
is
guess
that
a lot of
pre-
these planets are pre-Federation, and then.
Yeah, is Enterprise is pre-Utopia, maybe?
Yeah.
You
Well,
could
I guess
argue, 'cause-
it must be, but it also is. So then, his original series also pre-Utopia. If we're talking about the real utopian stuff being in Next Gen.
I think so. Well, you could make that point that they haven't quite got there because Roddenberry didn't really fully embrace the complete utopia until later on.
Yeah, I mean the Federation was mentioned in the original series. I think it was an idea from Gene
Yeah.
Coon, wasn't it?
It was a Federation.
The notion is there, but in terms of what it is, I would agree.
I don't think it's illogical to say that the Federation is not quite fully utopia. It's certainly not like Next Gen levels.
It doesn't feel like a utopia when an officer on a starship has to bring coffee to all of the bridge officers just because they're a sexy lady. It's not a utopia for that.
Utopia
lady.
for some.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not a utopia for everyone.
Yeah.
But isn't that the problem with a utopia?
It is indeed.
In general, it depends on what your idea of a utopia is.
Yes.
I guess.
I think Roddenberry's vision of a utopia definitely would involve a number of leggy ladies.
Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, going back to Homefront and Paradise Lost, which I know I keep saying. And then I keep saying one thing, and then we immediately get distracted and go off
examples
into.
of non-Starfleet life, though.
Yes, that's it. We see
got a huge amount to go on.
We see civilians, and we see Sisko's dad is a civilian, and we see what civilian life might be a little bit like if you own a restaurant. I always get really hung up on Nathan, who is like the kitchen hand in Dad Sisko's restaurant. I just think
he's like the sous chef, isn't he, I suppose?
Yeah. I mean, like Sisko's dad's a little bit disparaging. There's a line where he says like Nathan, like because Sisko's dad has some health problems and they're trying to get him to take it easy, and it's like, what am I going to do? Leave this place for Nathan to run? Fucking Nathan.
You know, Dad, you could come and visit us at the station once in a while.
Don't start that again. Earth's my home. It's where I belong. Besides, what would happen to the restaurant if I went gallivanting around the galaxy? You think Nathan can handle this place on his own?
It's like, well, hang on a minute. Is Nathan living in a utopia where he's working for Sisko's dad, a guy who has absolutely no faith in him? How much fun is he having in this world where he's like washing pots? Sisko's dad, like, another month of getting these pots super clean, you can make the gumbo.
Maybe he's having too much fun. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's what Dad Sisko's problem is. He's having too much fun.
He's living in the utopia. Just gets to bully Nathan all the time.
As we see, he even makes his own son and grandson sit back like washing the potatoes
shrimps.
or something.
He does,
peeling shrimps.
But these jobs have to be done.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, they don't because he has replicators.
You just
replicate.
pull out the poop line,
You do.
don't you, when you prepare shrimps?
Of a potato? Oh, of a shrimp. Yeah.
No, potato, definitely.
Poop line of a potato.
And prawns, isn't it? Sorry, shrimps are teeny. Prawns are a bit bigger. Which one's the bigger one? Shrimps.
Prawns, the bigger ones. Shrimps, the little ones.
Shrimps
shrimps generally.
So prawns are ones when you
diminutive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Apparently, I mean, I just hear that from when people have gone to restaurants and they prepared shrimps and haven't done that.
Yeah.
We've done that thing again where I started talking about those episodes. We've got sidelines. Talking about prawns, poop line. But the thing I wanted to say about these episodes, I'll say maybe I'll actually try and get to the flipping point this time, which is what I should have done in the first place. So this is an example where we see an admiral doing something untoward and a bit corrupt, and has that ever happened in Star Trek before? I don't know, but
Drumhead.
Yes, yeah. I'm being facetious. It has, hasn't it? But so the point is that do we really live in? Is the Federation really a utopia if you can have admirals who can be kind of corrupt and have their own agenda and can be pushing a certain thing? We've seen that quite a few times in TNG, and that's kind of the story in these episodes where there's effectively a coup and an admiral is trying to take over and bring martial law.
Martial law is working really well on Earth in that episode, though, because everyone just goes along with it. I mean, Sisko's dad is initially resistant, but of course he falls into line quite quickly.
He does, and he's happily making gumbo for the.
Well, they're testing his blood.
Yeah. That's it. But yeah, I mean, the drumhead is another good example of a dystopian edge to TNG, where you have to question it. I mean, in that episode, the admiral in question is unfairly persecuting an officer, isn't she?
Yeah.
And it seems like she's done that before.
Yes.
And you have to wonder how many times has that happened for it to be brought up on that.
Yeah.
And is it a utopia for those people? No.
Yeah, it is because that we've seen an admiral go rogue before because he couldn't get his way and he stole a starship, blew it up, stole it, killed the Klingon crew, stole their starship, engaged in unauthorized time travel, brought some whales into the future,
oh my God.
which is like a potential biological.
This guy, so he must be like the most awful villain in all of Star Trek. He sounds like a horrible person.
It's James T. Kirk.
You are kidding me. That's a good point because a lot of the time main characters do disobey the rules, the Federation, but in most of the movies that seems to happen. But in Insurrection,
why was the Federation Council even considering allowing the sonar to do this crazy collection shit on the rings of the Baku planet? Why?
Yeah.
Why?
And why? Data has to say, "To hell with our orders."
No, that's in First Contact.
Oh, right, he does. Right, so in First Contact, he also disobey orders.
Lock and load.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
He lists,
and then
it's Worf that lists all the explosives and guns that Picard's taking down to the planet.
Picard says to Riker and LaForge, get out of the briar patch and tell the Federation Council, put a human face on this or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Make them realise the Baku were people. That's what they have to go and do, because the Federation was found it much easier to see the value of the metaphasic radiation. They did not consider the personal cost to the people who lived there.
Yeah.
Get through the bureaucracy. Get through the red tape.
So a lot of our hero characters do have a real anti-authoritarian kind of edge to them. Kirk definitely does. Picard does at times. But we know Picard's broken the Prime Directive at least 9 times. We know that Archer does. Janeway definitely does. So yeah, this feels like that's because the Federation is a horrible dystopia.
Well, it is.
I guess in Starfleet,
fighting against it.
I guess as a captain of a ship, if anyone's going to have agency in this society, that's where it's going to be, isn't it? You in terms of important decision making, that's you've got a certain amount of power there, haven't you? And that gives you some freedom within this bureaucracy, I suppose, and that's natural. I think it's natural that those characters would have those feelings. I remember listening to a series on Radio 4 a while ago, called A History of the World in 1,000 Objects, and I can't remember the exact object that the guy was talking about, but basically his point was that bureaucracy is necessary in order for a society to keep going, because if there's not bureaucracy, if there's not red tape, then it's more likely that wars and things that threaten that society will happen, and it seems like this is kind of what's happening here. Like bureaucracy is part of how the Federation keeps itself going. It has lots of rules, and another thing that I recalled was a while ago. I listened to a podcast they were talking about magic and how people who practice magic, how it works for them. And basically, the idea is that it's a combination of ritual and perception equal your reality. So you perform a ritual, your perception of it combine, and it informs your reality. That's why you're doing it. And in a way, if the Federation probably does have a sort of a ritualistic element to it, but the way if people are doing the same things every day, and they're expecting that to have the results that it usually has, you kind of, it's not a ritual in so much as like a magical ritual, but you're doing the same thing every day, and the same things are happening to you every day, and it's, why would you question that? And it informs your reality, and you can, and I can see the you perceive your reality as a utopia, even when it's not. It's just because you're so used to doing the same thing all the time, and it becomes routine, and you sort of, and that's it. And I mean, so in a way, I guess the Federation could be a utopia, but it's not. It's not one that we would recognise because it's because we're from the outside looking in. I suppose if you're inside it, then it is maybe. But if you're outside it, then it's not.
But then, what happens when you stop doing the same thing every day and you look up?
Can you? If you can do that, then yes, I would say then it stops becoming a utopia. You get more agency, I think.
Yeah. So the lack of agency is what makes it a utopia. And that's
it shouldn't be, but yeah, I mean, I suppose
the lack of kind of
Now I just
but it's not you're not directly having agency taken away from you. It's just
you're just giving it away.
Yeah,
you're giving your own agency away.
You're a turkey voting for Christmas.
Yeah.
Now I feel like everyone in the Federation is just Emmett at the beginning of the Lego movie.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
I guess the thing is, you do have to kind of take a step back and remember, okay, this is a TV show, and as Rick was saying, this is a whole bunch of different ideas, I guess, about what a utopia is, and that there's a set idea that the Federation is a utopia, and in various different TV shows and different writers and different ideas have explored that from all sorts of different angles, and it's not actually a real world, I guess. It's a construct.
I think the whole notion of Roddenberry's vision.
It is hard to say.
I think so.
There's the notion of Roddenberry's vision in the future, but I think that was a changeable vision as it went through time, and it's a vision as interpreted by different writers.
Yeah.
So none of it's consistent. You can't say, oh, but the future Star Trek society is this because Roddenberry's vision, because even that, which would seem to be the most solid basis, changed as things developed and was interpreted. So it's supposed to be a utopia, but I think at some points it's come across, however meant to, as worryingly dystopian.
Yeah. And not to sort of undo everything that we've said on this podcast, but you could say, why does it really matter? because ultimately you could watch Star Trek and completely buy into the idea that it's a utopia. You could watch it and completely object to the idea of it being a utopia and see it as a dystopia, but you can enjoy it both ways, and you can get something out of it both ways. So you could say it's just two different ways of looking at a story.
I think the important thing is that you watch Star Trek, you take from it what you interpret it, but most of all, you come and listen to our podcast and talk about it.
Right.
And possibly get on the Patreon and give us...
That's exactly what I was going to say, and support us financially. That's exactly what people should be doing. In the utopia of 10Backward. I feel like we've sort of come to a natural end.
Do you have anything else to add about Homefront and Paradise Lost?
I really like those episodes.
They are great.
But they're a little bit stagey.
Oh, I like
because
it.
they don't. I don't mind that. I feel like in the second part, they could have benefited from it being it feeling like it's a big story that they're telling. A lot of it towards the end is just told in like 2 different offices.
Yeah.
And it's like, could we not have seen a few more sort of exterior shots of, Federation troops on the streets? It's a budget thing, isn't it?
There's like the 3 or 4 people. My main problem with that episode is there's the point where Cisco brings a member of Red Squad into his office and interviews him and gets a complete I lost the word.
It's like a confession, I guess.
Confession, a complete ice cream, a complete confession, as they wiped out the entire planet.
It's all the evidence
electric grid.
Yeah,
all of the power grid's wiped out. At not point did he think that he was going to record this as evidence.
Yeah.
And that's all he would need to take to the, I don't know, Prime Minister, and that would cut a lot of the events short.
It would cut the running time short. I think that's the problem, because then it's like, then they do it.
Might not even have got that awesome battle between the Defiant and the Lakota.
No, but they could have had that, because they could have already been on their way, and they could have had that awesome battle, and that would be the, I don't know,
but also,
anyway,
I suppose they could, but because the
the
Defiant had the key bit of evidence
could have still
they
been
needed.
going on. And then they could have had a fight with the coup and the people who are against the coup, the coup, and it could have been so much bigger.
Was Cisco should have meant to record it, and then he wrote, I've done a will.
What kind of idiot would do something as stupid as that? Though that would take you out of the episode, because you'd be like, no one would do such a stupid. That's all I have to say. I think. Yeah. Other than Paradise Lost and Homefront, good episodes actually. Even though I just dissed part 2 a little bit. Good. I'm glad they got made.
I was just thinking.
Well done them.
There is an episode in series 2 of Deep Space Nine where O'Brien and Cisco discover a planet where a small group have gone to get away from the hurly-burly of daily life of the Federation and live a simpler existence away from technology. And through the course of the episode, it turns out that the leader of that colony has deliberately suppressed technology on that planet with a duonetic field. And when Cisco doesn't like it, locks him in a tiny box on several occasions. And it's telling that someone thinks, we need a better life than is in the Federation. So there's clearly flaws if people leave for a better life. And that better life involves locking people in tiny boxes. Well, what does that say about the Federation?
I just got really hung up on your use of the phrase hurly-burly. I really liked it, but I struggled
the first time
to
I've used that phrase on the podcast.
I don't think we've said that before on the podcast. We should say it on every episode now. I think we should wind this up, shouldn't we? And let our listeners
decide for themselves.
Yes.
Utopia or dystopia.
Yeah.
Have a think. Let us know your thoughts.
Which is better? There's only one way to find out.
Yeah. But whatever you decide, make sure you contribute to us financially as patrons. Bye. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes,
I've enjoyed this one. It's been fun, hasn't it?
Yes, it has indeed.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Do you realize how incredible this is? It's tradition!
You ever noticed her bum? What? Her bum.
Oh no!
I will say
Fewer
things.
Okay.
Enough of this self-indulgence.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, our website is www.lowerdecksradio.co.uk. You can reach us on the Twitters at 10Backward, 10 being the number and backward being the word backward. We're also on Facebook at www.facebook.com. crew.com/10Backward podcast. You can also email us at crew@lowerdexradio.co.uk. On a personal, individual level, my Twitter is @WiltHurland. Rick Everson's Twitter is @TrekFanRick. And Rick Palmer's Twitter is @Mr. Imhotep.
Hi, thank you again for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you might consider supporting us. We now have a Patreon where people can pledge small amounts to fund our ongoing projects like keeping our website up to date, new audio equipment as we're going along, and potentially opportunities to expand our content. You can go look at this at patreon.com/lowerdexradio. If you don't feel you can donate but would still like to support us, we would love it if you could subscribe to us on however you get your podcasts, through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or we're on various third-party apps. And if you could leave us a review on any of those, that would be fantastic and we'd be very appreciative.
Thanks again for listening, and please tune in for more podcasts from the 10Backward crew.
Laddie, don't you think you should rephrase that?
10 backward.
10 backward.
It's insidious.